The December rain hammered against the windows of Riverside Elementary like thousands of tiny fists demanding entry. 7-year-old Sophie Chen sat cross-legged on the worn carpet of the school's multipurpose room, her small fingers tracing the faded pattern of Christmas trees that had been walked over by countless children before her. Around her, the chaos of the last day before winter break swirled like a storm she couldn't quite escape. Kids shrieking with excitement about presents and family gatherings. Teachers desperately trying to maintain order until the final bell. Parents already clustering near the doorway with that particular brand of December exhaustion mixed with forced holiday cheer. Sophie kept her eyes down, focused on a loose thread in her donated sweater. It was green, 2 sizes too big, and smelled faintly of someone else's fabric softener. Sam. Warren, the school counselor, had pulled it from the donation bin that morning when Sophie showed up in a t-shirt despite the 40-degree weather outside. The cold never seemed to bother Sophie the way it should. She'd learned early that discomfort was just another constant, like hunger, or the ache in her chest when she watched other kids get picked up by smiling parents. The multi-purpose room, which served as cafeteria, assembly hall, and gym, depending on the day, was decorated with construction paper snowflakes and strings of lights that flickered intermittently. The fluorescent bulbs above buzzed their monotonous song. Sophie had helped make some of those snowflakes during art class, carefully cutting the folded paper just like Miss Chen had shown them, but hers had come out lopsided. They were probably the ugly ones tucked in the corner near the emergency exit. Sophie, Sol. Warren's voice cut through the noise, gentle but weighted with something Sophie had learned to recognize as pity. The counselor crouched beside her, her knees cracking audibly. She was a round woman in her 50s, with graying hair, always pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that had seen too many broken children. "Honey, we need to talk about the arrangements for tonight." Sophie's stomach tightened. Arrangements. That word always meant something bad was coming. "Your aunt called. She said they won't be able to take you for Christmas break after all. There's been a situation with your cousin and—" "It's okay," Sophie interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd perfected this response over the past 2 years since her mother's overdose, had left her bouncing between relatives who saw her as an obligation rather than a child. "I understand," but she didn't understand. Not really. How could she understand why Aunt Maria had promised 3 weeks ago that this Christmas would be different? That Sophie could stay through New Year's, that maybe, just maybe, it could become permanent. How could she understand why those promises evaporated like rain on hot pavement every single time Ms. Warren's jaw tightened, and Sophie recognized that look too? Anger, but not at her. Never at her. "Your uncle is on his way to pick you up. He'll take you to your grandmother's house for tonight, and then we'll figure out the rest after the holiday." Grandmother. The word should have brought comfort images of cookies and warm hugs. Instead, Sophie pictured the small apartment that smelled of cigarettes and old cooking oil, where her grandmother Barbara spent most days in a worn recliner, staring at game shows with the volume turned up too loud. Barbara was 68 but looked 80, worn down by decades of hard living and harder choices. She'd raised Sophie's mother poorly. She'd be the first to admit it, and seemed to view Sophie as evidence of her failure repeating itself. "Does she know I'm coming?" The pause before Ms. Warren answered told Sophie everything. "Your uncle will sort it out. You know how family can be during the holidays. Everyone's stressed and everyone's busy." Sophie finished. Through the large windows, Sophie could see the Oregon rain transitioning to sleet, the sky the color of old bruises. Riverside sat nestled in the Cascade foothills, a logging town that had seen better days. The main street still had a hardware store, a diner, and Ray's Gas and Go, but half the storefronts stood empty, their windows papered over with faded for lease signs. The mill had closed 5 years ago, and the town was slowly bleeding population. The people who remained were either too stubborn to leave or too broke to afford anywhere else. Sophie had been born in Portland back when her mother was still trying to hold things together. But the city had been too expensive, the temptations too available, and they'd ended up here in Riverside with Barbara in the Section 8 housing complex on the east side of town. Sophie barely remembered those early years, just fragments of her mother's laugh before the drugs won the way she used to braid Sophie's long black hair before it all fell apart. "Sophie, look at me." Ms. Warren's voice was firmer now. When Sophie finally met her eyes, she saw something that looked like determination. "I'm going to make some calls over the break. We're going to find you a better situation, a real placement. This isn't right, and I'm not going to let it continue. Do you understand? Sophie nodded, but she'd heard similar promises before. The system was overwhelmed, Ms. Warren had explained during one of their previous conversations. There weren't enough foster families, especially for older kids with backgrounds. Sophie wasn't sure what her background was exactly, except that it seemed to be something that made people uncomfortable, something that appeared in whispered conversations and files that adults carried around like shameful secrets. The bell rang and the room erupted in celebration. Kids grabbed backpacks and lunchboxes, streaming toward their waiting parents. Sophie watched them go one by one until the multipurpose room was nearly empty. Just her Ms. Warren and Jenna Kim, whose dad was always late because he worked the day shift at the hospital in Bend, 40 minutes away. He'll be here soon, Jenna said, though Sophie hadn't asked. Jenna was in her class, a quiet girl with glasses and a purple backpack covered in pins of bands Sophie had never heard of. My dad, I mean. He's always late, but he comes. The simple certainty in those words, he comes, struck Sophie like a physical blow. What must it be like, she wondered, to have that kind of confidence to know, without doubt, that someone would show up for you 20 minutes later? Uncle Frank's truck pulled up outside. Sophie recognized the rusted blue Ford from previous pickups, its muffler held on with wire and duct tape. Frank was Barbara's son from her first marriage, a man in his 40s with a beer belly and perpetually bloodshot eyes. He wasn't cruel exactly, just indifferent. Sophie was a chore to be completed, like taking out the trash or paying a bill. Ms. Warren walked her out carrying Sophie's small backpack containing a change of clothes, a toothbrush, and the tattered paperback of Charlotte's Web that was the only thing she owned that felt like hers. The sleet stung Sophie's face as they crossed the parking lot. Frank barely glanced at her as she climbed into the passenger seat. Seatbelt, he grunted, already pulling away before Ms. Warren had even closed the door properly. The drive to Barbara's apartment took 12 minutes. Frank said nothing, just played classic rock low on the radio and drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. Sophie watched Riverside slide past the boarded-up mill, the church with its crooked nativity scene, the discount store where everything cost $1 or less. Christmas lights were strung across Main Street, but half the bulbs were burned out, giving the decorations a gap-toothed appearance. Barbara's apartment complex sat at the edge of town, a collection of identical two-story buildings with peeling yellow paint and rusted railings. Frank parked, but didn't turn off the engine. Listen, he said, still not looking at her. Your grandmother's not feeling great. Try not to be, don't be a problem. Sophie nodded. She'd perfected the art of not being a problem. It meant being invisible, needing nothing, wanting nothing, existing as a shadow that took up no space and made no sound. And Sophie. Frank finally turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that might have been guilt or might have been indigestion. It's not that people don't, it's just complicated. She didn't know, but she nodded anyway because that's what adults wanted, the appearance of understanding, even when nothing made sense. Frank popped the truck into reverse before Sophie had even closed the door. She watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing into the sleet, and felt that familiar hollowness expanding in her chest. The place where other kids seemed to have something warm and solid, something that kept them tethered to the world, felt empty in Sophie, like a room no one had ever bothered to furnish. The apartment building's entrance smelled of mildew and something burning that might have been someone's dinner. Sophie climbed the stairs to the second-floor apartment 2C and knocked softly. She could hear the television inside loud enough that Barbara probably hadn't heard her. She knocked again, harder. The door opened and Barbara stood there in her bathrobe, a cigarette dangling from her lips, her expression shifting from confusion to irritation in the space of a heartbeat. "What are you doing here?" Barbara's voice was gravel from decades of smoking. "Uncle Frank brought me, for Christmas Eve." Aunt Maria said Teresa. Barbara spat the name like a curse. That girl couldn't organize a two-car parade. "Get in here before you let all the heat out, and don't touch anything." "I just cleaned." The apartment was small, living room that flowed into a kitchenette, one bedroom, one bathroom. It didn't look recently clean to Sophie's eyes, but she'd learned not to contradict adults about things that didn't matter. The television was tuned to a game show, and the coffee table was littered with scratch-off lottery tickets in an overflowing ashtray. "I didn't know you were coming," Barbara said, settling back into her recliner with a grunt. "Nobody tells me anything. Where are you supposed to sleep? The couch is fine," Sophie said quickly. "I don't need much. Barbara echoed, lighting a fresh cigarette from the dying ember of the last one. Story of your life, isn't it? Sophie found half a sandwich wrapped in plastic and a bruised apple in the refrigerator. She ate standing at the kitchenette counter, trying to take up as little space as possible. Through the window, she could see the parking lot, and beyond it, the dark expanse of pine forest that gave the neighboring towns their names. The sleet had turned to snow, fat flakes that seemed to glow in the sodium light of the street lamps. It was Christmas Eve. Somewhere in Riverside, families were gathering around decorated trees. Children were sneaking peeks at presents. Parents were laughing over spiked eggnog and stories about the year. Somewhere in the world, there were homes filled with the kind of love that Sophie had only ever seen in movies and television commercials. But here in apartment 2C, there was only the drone of the television, the acrid smell of cigarette smoke, and the cold certainty that she was once again exactly where no one wanted her to be. Sophie pulled the too big sweater tighter around her small frame and wondered not for the first time what it would take to become the kind of person that people actually wanted to keep. Barbara turned off the television around 9 and tossed Sophie a thin blanket that smelled faintly of mothballs. Don't stay up all night. Barbara's words carried no warmth, just the instruction itself. And if you need the bathroom, don't flush. The pipes are loud. Sophie curled into the corner of the couch, making herself as small as possible. Through the thin walls, she could hear the neighbors, the Martinez family in 2D. Their television played cheerful Christmas music. A child laughed bright and untroubled. Someone called out about cookies being ready. Sophie pressed Charlotte's Web against her chest. Inside the front cover, in faded pencil, someone had written, "To Jessica. Love, Mom." Jessica was Sophie's mother. The grandmother who'd given her this book was dead now, too, had been for years before Sophie was born. Sometimes Sophie wondered if there was a curse on the women in her family, each generation more broken than the last. She opened the journal Ms. Warren had given her last month, the one she was supposed to write her feelings in, but mostly left blank. Tonight, though, something pushed her to put pen to paper. Christmas Eve. Nobody wanted me to come here. Barbara didn't know I was coming. Aunt Maria promised, and then changed her mind like everyone does. Miss Warren says she'll find me a better place, but I've heard that before. I try to be good. I try not to need anything. But maybe there's something wrong with me that I can't see. Maybe that's why nobody keeps me. She closed the journal before the tears could smudge the ink. Sophie woke on Christmas morning to silence. Not the peaceful silence of a house at rest, but the hollow quiet of a space where joy had forgotten to arrive. The apartment was cold. Barbara kept the thermostat low to save on the electric bill, and the couch cushions had left uncomfortable ridges along Sophie's side where she'd slept curled into a tight ball. Gray morning light filtered through the thin curtains. Outside Riverside was covered in a fresh layer of snow that made everything look cleaner than it actually was, like a cheap coat of paint over rot. Sophie could hear Barbara snoring in the bedroom, a rattling sound that spoke of damaged lungs and poor health. She sat up slowly, folding the thin blanket. On a television, a local news anchor was discussing weather patterns with forced enthusiasm. Sophie watched without really seeing her mind elsewhere. In approximately 48 hours, she'd have to go back to school, back to Ms. Warren's office, back to the uncomfortable conversations about finding a better fit. What happened to kids who never fit anywhere? The question had haunted Sophie for months. She'd asked Ms. Warren once, trying to make it sound casual, like she was just curious. The counselor had given her a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes and said that every child found their place eventually. But Sophie had seen enough kids come and go through Riverside Elementary's intervention programs to know that eventually sometimes meant never. The apartment was stuffy despite the cold, the air thick with stale cigarette smoke. Sophie went to the kitchenette and poured herself a glass of water from the tap. The pipes groaned and clanked, and she heard Barbara curse from the bedroom. "Keep it down out there. Sorry," Sophie whispered, though Barbara probably couldn't hear her. She spent the next hour sitting at the small kitchen table reading Charlotte's Web for probably the 20th time. The book's pages were soft and worn, the spine cracked from repeated openings. It had been her mother's once. Sophie had found it in a box of her things after the overdose. Barbara emerged around 10, shuffling in slippers and a ratty robe. She looked older in the morning light, the lines on her face deeper, her thin gray hair standing at odd angles. She went straight for the coffee pot without acknowledging Sophie's presence. "There's cereal in the cupboard," Barbara said eventually, her back still turned. Help yourself. Sophie had already eaten the last of the generic cornflakes the night before, but she didn't mention it. I'm not really hungry, thank you though. Barbara turned coffee mug in hand and studied Sophie with an expression that was hard to read. You look just like her, you know. Your mother. Same eyes, same mouth. It's unsettling. Sophie didn't know what to say to that. She'd been told she looked like her mother before, but usually it was said with warmth like a compliment. From Barbara, it sounded like an accusation. She was about your age when I realized I'd already lost her. Barbara continued settling into her recliner with a groan. 7, 8 years old. Already lying, already stealing. Some kids are just born wrong, I guess. Born with something missing inside them. The words landed like stones in Sophie's stomach. My mom was sick. Sophie's voice came out smaller than she intended. Ms. Warren said addiction is a disease. Barbara's laugh was bitter. Ms. Warren didn't have to raise her. That woman sees you for an hour a week and thinks she understands. But I'm the one who lived it. I'm the one who watched her destroy herself and everyone around her, and now here you are, and they expect me to. She cut herself off to taking a long sip of coffee. The silence that followed was worse than the words. Sophie wanted to say that she wasn't her mother, that she was trying her best to be good to be wanted, but the words stuck in her throat because a small, terrible part of her wondered if Barbara was right. Maybe there was something wrong inside her. Maybe that's why no one ever wanted to keep her. Maybe she was born with something missing, just like her mother, and everyone could see it except her. The morning dragged on. Barbara watched television. Sophie read her book. Neither of them acknowledged that it was Christmas, that this should be different somehow. Around noon, Barbara heated up a can of soup and they ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of spoons against bowls and the canned laughter from the TV. It was just after 2 in the afternoon when they heard it, a sound like distant thunder rolling through the valley. Barbara's head snapped up, her expression shifting to annoyance. What the hell is that? The sound grew louder, not thunder at all, but engines. Many engines, the deep rhythmic roar of motorcycles moving in formation. Barbara pushed herself out of the recliner and went to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Jesus Christ. Sophie joined her, standing on tiptoes to see past Barbara's shoulder. What she saw made her breath catch. Motorcycles. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, rolling into the parking lot of the apartment complex in a seemingly endless stream. They weren't just any motorcycles. These were heavy bikes, Harleys mostly chrome gleaming, even under the overcast sky. And the riders Sophie had seen bikers before passing through Riverside on their way to somewhere else, but never like this, never this many. They wore leather jackets, and as they began to park their bikes in neat rows, Sophie could see the patches on their backs. Death head skulls with wings and words Hell's Angels, Motorcycle Club. Different chapters. Oregon, California, Washington, Nevada. This can't be good, Barbara muttered. We're probably about to get robbed or worse. But Sophie watched as the bikers dismounted, and they didn't look like they were there to rob anyone. Many of them were older, in their 50s and 60s, though some were younger. There were women too, she noticed. Not many, but they were there walking with the same confident swagger as the men. And they were carrying things, bags and boxes, wrapped presents, even a small Christmas tree. The procession seemed endless. More bikes kept arriving, parking wherever they could find space in the lot, along the street and the grass. Sophie started counting, but lost track after 100. 203. She'd never seen anything like it. What are they doing? Sophie whispered. Nothing good, Barbara said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. The bikers began to gather in the parking lot, organizing themselves with military precision. A few of them, clearly the leaders, stood at the center, directing the others. One man in particular caught Sophie's attention. He was massive, easily 6'4", with a gray beard that reached his chest and arms covered in tattoos. Despite his intimidating appearance, he was smiling, laughing with the bikers around him as they organized their cargo. Then someone knocked on the door, 3 firm raps that made Barbara jump. Don't answer it, Barbara hissed. But Sophie was already moving toward the door, driven by something she couldn't name. Curiosity, maybe, or the simple fact that anything, even potential danger, was better than the suffocating emptiness of the apartment. She opened the door before Barbara could stop her. Standing in the hallway was a woman in her early 40s, wearing a leather jacket with the Hell's Angels patch and faded jeans. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her face, though lined from years of hard living, held a surprising warmth. Behind her stood two men both built like linebackers, their expressions neutral, but not hostile. "Hey there, sweetheart," the woman said, crouching down to Sophie's eye level. "Is your name Sophie?" Sophie nodded, too surprised to speak. "My name's Lisa. Lisa Guerrero. I'm with the Hells Angels Oregon chapter. We got a call from a friend, a lady named Ms. Warren, who said there was a little girl here who might need some Christmas spirit." "That you?" Sophie's mind reeled. Ms. Warren had called the Hells Angels. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream or a story that couldn't be real. I don't understand." Lisa's smile widened. "That's okay, honey. You don't have to understand. You just have to let us make Christmas happen." "What do you say? Can we come in for a minute?" Barbara appeared behind Sophie, her hand clamping down on Sophie's shoulder. "Now wait just a minute. Who the hell are you people? And how did you get my granddaughter's name?" Lisa stood facing Barbara with a calm that suggested she'd handled difficult people before. "Ma'am, I'm Lisa Guerrero. Every year, the Hells Angels chapters across the Northwest do a toy run for kids who need it. Usually we go to the children's hospital or a shelter, but this year, Ms. Warren from Riverside Elementary reached out to us about a specific situation. A little girl who needed to know she wasn't alone. That's all we're here to do. Bring some toys, some food, spread some joy. We're not here to cause trouble." Ms. Warren had no right. Barbara started. "Ms. Warren has every right to advocate for this child." Lisa interrupted, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "Now we can do this one of two ways. You can let us give Sophie a Christmas, or we can stand out here and make a scene. Your choice, ma'am. But either way, this little girl is getting a Christmas." Barbara's face cycled through several emotions: anger, indignation, and finally resignation. She must have realized what Sophie was already understanding. 500 bikers had just shown up, and they weren't leaving until they'd accomplished what they came for. "Fine," Barbara said tightly, "but make it quick." Lisa's smile returned. She turned and gave a hand signal to the bikers waiting in the parking lot below. Suddenly, the world exploded into motion. Bikers began climbing the stairs carrying boxes and bags. But they didn't just come to apartment 2C. They spread throughout the complex, knocking on doors, handing out presents to every child they could find. The sound of children's laughter began to fill the air, punctuated by surprised gasps from parents and the ongoing rumble of motorcycle engines. Sophie stood in the doorway watching in stunned silence as Lisa and two other bikers brought in armload after armload of gifts. A new winter coat in exactly her size, snow boots with fleece lining, clothes that didn't come from a donation bin, new jeans, sweaters, shirts with the tags still on. Books, so many books, including a pristine hardcover edition of Charlotte's Web. Art supplies, a stuffed animal, a brown bear with a red ribbon that was so soft it made Sophie's throat tight with emotion. But it wasn't just for Sophie. Barbara watched in shock as they brought in bags of groceries. Real food, not cheap staples, but quality items, fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, bread, cheese, coffee, even a small ham. And then impossibly, they brought in a Christmas tree, a real one about 4 feet tall, complete with a stand of lights and ornaments. "We'll set this up for you," Lisa said, directing two younger bikers who looked thrilled to be handling tree duty. Within 20 minutes, Barbara's dingy apartment had been transformed. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated and glowing. Presents were piled underneath it. The kitchen counter was covered with groceries, and Sophie stood in the center of it all, unable to process what was happening. The big man with the gray beard, the one Sophie had noticed earlier, appeared in the doorway. He had to duck to enter the apartment, his presence immediately filling the small space. But when he looked at Sophie, his eyes were gentle. "Hey there, little miss," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Name's Big Mike. I'm president of the Oregon chapter. Ms. Warren told us about you, told us you needed some people in your corner. Well, guess what? You got 500 people in your corner now. Merry Christmas, Sophie." He held out a card. Not a greeting card, but something official looking. Sophie took it with shaking hands. It was a membership card for the Hells Angels Little Angels program with her name printed on it and a phone number at the bottom. "That number there," Big Mike said, tapping the card with a finger the size of a sausage. "That's a direct line. You ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call that number. Someone will answer. Someone will help. You understand? You're one of our little angels now. That means you're family." Sophie looked up at this massive tattooed man who society would probably call dangerous, who looked like he could bench press a car, and saw only kindness in his eyes. Something inside her chest, that hollow, empty place, suddenly didn't feel quite so hollow anymore. "Thank you," she whispered, and then louder. "Thank you." Big Mike grinned, and, "Don't thank me yet. We got one more thing." He turned and shouted down the hallway. "Bring it up." Two bikers appeared carrying something large and unwieldy wrapped in a moving blanket. They brought it into the apartment and carefully unwrapped it. It was a bicycle. Not a cheap one from a discount store, but a real mountain bike, purple and silver, with Sophie's name painted on the frame in flowing script. It was the most beautiful thing Sophie had ever seen. "Custom job," Big Mike explained. "One of our brothers owns a bike shop in Salem. When we heard about you, he stayed up all night putting this together. It's yours, kiddo. Merry Christmas." Sophie couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She walked over to the bike, her hand reaching out to touch the handlebar, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. Her name, her actual name painted on the frame. Someone had made this specifically for her. Someone had thought she was worth staying up all night for. The tears came suddenly, overwhelming her. She'd been so good at holding them back for so long, at being strong and not being a problem. But this broke something open inside her. She sobbed to her small shoulders, shaking 2 years of loneliness and rejection pouring out. Lisa was there immediately, gathering Sophie into a hug that smelled of leather and perfume. And something else, something that felt like safety. "Let it out, honey. Let it all out. You're allowed to feel this. You're allowed to be a kid." And Sophie did. She cried into Lisa's jacket while 500 Hell's Angels, men and women, who the world called outlaws and criminals, stood in and around a crumbling apartment complex in Riverside, Oregon, and proved that sometimes the most unexpected people are capable of the most extraordinary grace. The rest of Christmas Day unfolded like a dream Sophie was afraid she'd wake from. The bikers didn't just drop off presents and leave. They stayed. Big Mike and Lisa took charge of organizing what they called the Christmas dinner, which turned the parking lot into an impromptu celebration. Some bikers produced portable grills and camp stoves from their saddlebags. Others made runs to Raise Gas and Go, which had apparently agreed to open despite it being Christmas, for supplies. Within an hour, the smell of grilling meat and roasting vegetables filled the cold December air. Sophie watched from Barbara's window, still clutching the Little Angels membership card, as if letting go might cause all of this to vanish. The apartment complex, normally so quiet and depressing, had come alive. Children from neighboring apartments had emerged, drawn by the commotion and the promise of presents. The bikers were patient with each one, making sure every kid got something, even those whose parents seemed wary of the leather-clad strangers who descended on their Christmas. "You should go down there," Lisa said gently. She'd stayed in the apartment, seeming to sense that Sophie needed an anchor, someone to help her navigate this overwhelming generosity. "The party's for you, sweetheart." Sophie glanced at Barbara, who sat in her recliner with an expression Sophie couldn't quite read. Confusion, maybe, or discomfort at having her cynicism challenged so directly. "Go on," Barbara said finally, not looking at Sophie. "Don't just stand there looking pathetic." It wasn't permission exactly, more like dismissal. But Sophie would take it. She pulled on her new winter coat. It fit perfectly warm and comfortable in a way her donated clothes never had been, and followed Lisa downstairs. The parking lot had been completely transformed. Long folding tables had appeared from somewhere, covered with food and drinks. Someone had set up speakers connected to a phone, playing classic rock Christmas songs. The bikers had formed a rough circle of motorcycles, creating a boundary that somehow made the space feel protected rather than trapped. Children ran between the adults, their laughter cutting through the winter air like bells. "There she is," Big Mike's voice boomed across the lot, "the guest of honor." Suddenly, Sophie found herself the center of attention as 500 faces turned her way. She froze, her instinct to make herself invisible, warring with the obvious fact that invisibility was no longer an option. But instead of the judgment or pity she'd expected, she saw only warmth in those weathered faces. These were people who knew what it meant to be outsiders, to be judged by appearances rather than actions. They recognized one of their own. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and laugh lines approached, holding out a plate piled high with food. "You must be starving, honey. I'm Diane. I've been riding with the Angels for 30 years, and let me tell you, we take our food seriously. You got some of the best brisket in the Pacific Northwest right there. Sophie took the plate with both hands, the weight of it substantial and real. Brisket, coleslaw, cornbread, green beans, and a slice of what looked like homemade apple pie. It was more food than she usually saw in a week. Thank you, Sophie said the words, feeling inadequate for everything she was feeling. Don't thank me. Eat. Diane winked. And then come find me. I brought my Polaroid camera and we're going to take some pictures. You deserve memories, you know. As Sophie ate and the food was incredible, rich and flavorful, and made with obvious care, bikers came up to introduce themselves. There was Tommy from the Sacramento chapter who did magic tricks with coins that made Sophie giggle. There was Razor, whose fierce appearance and face full of tattoos didn't match his gentle voice as he talked about his own daughter, now grown. There was Red, a woman in her 40s with appropriately red hair down to her waist, who worked as a nurse when she wasn't riding. Here's the thing about family, Red said, sitting down next to Sophie on the curb. Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. We choose to look out for each other. We choose to show up when things get hard. That's what makes us brothers and sisters. That choice. Ms. Warren told you about me, Sophie asked, still trying to understand how all of this had come to be. Red nodded. She reached out to our chapter about 3 weeks ago. Said there was a little girl who was slipping through the cracks who needed to know someone gave a damn. The Angels have been doing toy runs for decades. It's part of who we are. But usually we go to hospitals or shelters places with lots of kids. Ms. Warren, she asked if we could do something different this year. Something specifically for you. But why? The question burst out of Sophie before she could stop it. Why would you do all this for someone you don't even know? Red's expression softened. Because we've all been the kid that nobody wanted, Sophie. Maybe not in the exact way you have, but every single person here knows what it feels like to be on the outside, to be judged, to be told they don't matter. And we decided a long time ago that when we see someone hurting like that, especially a kid, we do something about it. She pulled out a phone and showed Sophie a photo of a young girl, maybe 10 years old, with the same striking red hair. That's my daughter, Stella. She's at her dad's place for Christmas, which is good. He's a good man. We just couldn't make it work. But when she was 7, right around your age, we were in a rough spot. I was working 3 jobs, barely keeping the lights on. And the Angels showed up for us. Brought food, helped with rent, made sure Stella had a real Christmas. That's when I knew I wanted to be part of this. That's when I decided that if I ever got my life together, I'd pay it forward. Sophie looked around the parking lot with new eyes. These weren't just random bikers doing a good deed for the cameras or the publicity. These were people who'd lived through their own versions of pain and decided to transform it into something better. Can I ask you something? Sophie said quietly. Anything, honey. Do you think there's something wrong with me? Like something that makes people not want to keep me? Red's face crumpled for just a moment before she composed herself. When she spoke, her voice was fierce. Listen to me very carefully, Sophie Chen. There is nothing, and I mean nothing, wrong with you. You are 7 years old. You should be worried about homework and cartoons and whether your bike is cool enough. You should not be wondering why the adults in your life have failed you, because that's what's happened here. The adults have failed, not you. Never you. The words hit Sophie like a wave and she felt tears threatening again. But if I was better, maybe no. Red's interruption was sharp but not unkind. No maybes, no what-ifs. You could be the perfect child, the smartest, the quietest, the most well-behaved, and some people still wouldn't choose you because they're broken inside. That's not a reflection on you. That's on them. Big Mike appeared carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. He handed one to Sophie and one to Red, then lowered himself to sit on the curb with them, his large frame making the simple action look comical. "We having a serious conversation?" he asked. "Just explaining some truths," Red said. Big Mike nodded thoughtfully, blowing on his hot chocolate. "You know, Sophie, I grew up in foster care. Bounced around from when I was 5 until I aged out at 18. 13 different homes in 13 years. Sophie looked up at him in surprise. This massive, confident man who commanded respect from hundreds of bikers had been like her. "Yeah," Mike continued, reading her expression. "Hard to believe now, right? But back then, I was a scrawny kid with anger issues and a smart mouth. Nobody wanted to deal with me, and for a long time I thought that meant I was unlovable. that there was something fundamentally broken inside me that everyone could see except me. What changed, Sophie asked. I met the angels. His smile was genuine warm. I was 19 working at a garage, still angry at the world. Some of the brothers would bring their bikes in for repairs, and eventually they started talking to me. Really talking, you know? Not like I was a problem to be solved, but like I was a person worth knowing. They saw past all my walls and defense mechanisms and anger, and they saw someone who just needed to be told they had value. The afternoon wore on, and Sophie found herself relaxing in a way she couldn't remember ever feeling before. She took pictures with Diane's Polaroid camera pictures of her, with Big Mike, with Lisa, with Red, with groups of smiling bikers making silly faces. Each photo was a small miracle proof that this day had actually happened, that she hadn't imagined the whole thing. Tommy the magician taught her a simple card trick. A biker named Chains, who'd earned his nickname from the elaborate chain wallet he wore, let her sit on his motorcycle and showed her how the controls worked. A woman named Phoenix with full-sleeve tattoos of flames braided Sophie's long black hair while telling stories about riding cross-country. As the winter sun began to set, painting the Oregon sky in shades of orange and pink, someone started a bonfire in a metal drum. The bikers gathered around it, and someone pulled out an acoustic guitar. They sang not Christmas carols exactly, but rock songs and folk songs and a few carols thrown in. Their voices were rough but sincere, and Sophie found herself singing along to the ones she knew. Barbara emerged from the apartment, eventually drawn by the noise or curiosity, or maybe something else. She stood at the edge of the gathering, arms crossed, watching. Big Mike noticed her and walked over, his large frame somehow non-threatening, despite his size. Sophie watched from across the fire as they talked. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw Barbara's defensive posture slowly soften, saw Big Mike gesture to the scene around them, saw Barbara's face do something complicated. Sadness and regret, and maybe a flicker of understanding. When Big Mike returned to the fire, he caught Sophie's eye and nodded. It wasn't much, but it felt like something had shifted. As the evening deepened and the temperature dropped, families began to drift back to their apartments, loaded down with gifts and leftover food. The bikers started to pack up, organizing themselves with the same efficiency they'd shown when arriving. But they didn't seem rushed. Several came to say goodbye to Sophie, personally pressing cards with phone numbers into her hands, making her promise to call if she needed anything. "We mean it," Phoenix said, crouching down for a final hug. "You call that number on your little angel's card. Day or night, someone will answer. That's a promise." Sophie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As the last of the daylight faded and the bikers began to mount their motorcycles, Lisa pulled Sophie aside. They stood a little apart from the others in a moment that felt private despite the crowd. "I need to tell you something," Lisa said, "and I need you to really hear me." Sophie nodded. "What happened here today? This wasn't charity. This wasn't us feeling sorry for you. This was recognition. We recognize you, Sophie. We see you. And more than that, we see what you could become." "What do you mean?" Lisa smiled. "You've got something special inside you, kid. I've seen a lot of children in rough situations over the years, and most of them have this look in their eyes like they've already given up, like they're just going through the motions. But not you. You're still fighting, still hoping, still believing that things could be better. That kind of strength, that's rare. That's precious. I don't feel strong," Sophie admitted. "The strongest people never do," Lisa said. "But here's what I want you to remember. Every single person here today has been through hell. We've been broken and put back together. We've been counted out and written off, and we survived. More than that, we found ways to thrive. You can too. Will it be easy? Hell no. Will there be days when you want to give up? Absolutely. But you've got 500 people who just proved they have your back. Use that. Draw strength from it." She pulled Sophie into a tight hug, and Sophie clung to her, breathing in the smell of leather and cold air, and something that felt impossibly like hope. The motorcycles roared to life one by one, the sound echoing off the apartment buildings and rolling through the valley. It was the same sound that had heralded their arrival, but now it sounded different to Sophie. Not threatening, but protective, like the growl of something fierce that had chosen to be gentle. Big Mike was the last to leave. He gave Sophie one final bear hug that lifted her off her feet, then handed her a small wrapped package. "Open it later," he said, "when you need a reminder." And then they were gone, 500 motorcycles streaming out of the parking lot and onto the highway, their taillights like a river of red stars flowing through the darkness. The sound of their engines faded gradually until all that was left was the cold night air and the smell of wood smoke from the dying bonfire. Sophie stood in the parking lot long after they disappeared, holding Big Mike's package, and feeling like the world had somehow expanded, like the walls that had been pressing in on her had suddenly been pushed back, revealing space she hadn't known existed. When she finally went back upstairs, Barbara was in the kitchen putting away the groceries the bikers had brought. She didn't look at Sophie when she spoke. "Those people," Barbara said slowly, "they think they can fix everything with presents and a party." Sophie felt something sharp in her chest. Here it came, the dismissal, the tearing down of something beautiful. But then Barbara continued, "Maybe they can't fix everything, but they fixed something today. I saw your face down there, Sophie. I haven't seen you smile like that since before your mama got bad." She finally turned to look at Sophie, and her expression was complicated. Not warm exactly, but not cold either. Something in between. "I'm not good at this," Barbara admitted. "Being a grandmother, being responsible for someone. I failed your mother so completely that I can't even look at you sometimes without seeing all my mistakes. But those bikers down there, they didn't see my mistakes. They saw a little girl who deserved better." And maybe they're right. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise that everything would change. But it was something, an acknowledgement, a crack in the armor that Barbara had built around herself. "Thank you for letting them come," Sophie said quietly. Barbara made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh, like I could have stopped them on. 500 bikers with a mission. They were getting in here one way or another. But when she turned back to the groceries, Sophie thought she saw the ghost of a smile on her grandmother's weathered face. That night, lying on the couch under her new blanket, surrounded by presents and proof that this day had actually happened, Sophie carefully opened Big Mike's package. Inside was a small silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a pair of angel wings. There was a note in a rough handwriting. "Sophie, these wings are a reminder that you can fly even when the world tries to clip you. You're never alone. You're part of the angels now. Big Mike." Sophie clutched the necklace to her chest and let the tears come. Not tears of sadness this time, but tears of relief. For the first time in 2 years, she felt like someone had actually seen her. Not as a burden or a problem or a reminder of someone else's failures, but as herself. As Sophie. As someone worth 500 people riding through the cold to say you matter. Outside, Riverside slept under its blanket of snow. But inside apartment 2C, a small girl lay awake wearing angel wings around her neck and dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, the story of her life wasn't already written. Maybe there were chapters yet to come that she couldn't even imagine. Chapters filled with people who chose her, who fought for her, who proved that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. And for the first time in a very long time, Sophie Chen fell asleep, believing in tomorrow. The day after Christmas brought a return to quiet in Riverside, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. The snow had stopped leaving the town, pristine and still. Sophie woke on Barbara's couch to find her grandmother already awake making coffee with actual cream instead of the powdered stuff she usually used. "Morning," Barbara said, and though her tone wasn't warm, it wasn't hostile either. Progress came in small steps. Sophie's new bicycle was propped against the wall near the door, too precious to leave outside, even though the apartment was crowded with it there. She'd spent an hour the previous night just looking at it, running her hands over the smooth frame, reading her name over and over like a prayer. Someone had made this for her. Someone thought she was worth the effort. The angel wings necklace hung around her neck, tucked under her shirt where she could feel it against her skin, a constant reminder that yesterday had been real. Barbara's phone rang while they were eating breakfast from the supplies the bikers had left. Real bacon, fresh eggs, bread that hadn't been frozen. Barbara answered with her usual gruff tone, "Yeah," but her expression changed as she listened. "It's for you," she said finally, holding the phone out to Sophie with an expression that might have been confusion or might have been curiosity. "It's Ms. Warren." Sophie took the phone with trembling hands. "Hello, Sophie. Merry day after Christmas, sweetheart." Ms. Warren's voice was warm, excited in a way Sophie had never heard before. "I hope the angels gave you a day to remember." "They did," Sophie said the words feeling inadequate to describe what had actually happened. Miss Warren, thank you. Thank you so much for... You don't need to thank me, honey. I just made a phone call. The angels did all the heavy lifting. There was a pause, and then Ms. Warren's tone shifted, becoming more serious but also more hopeful. Sophie, I'm calling because I have news. Real news. I made some calls over the holiday, pulled in some favors, and I may have found something. A placement. A real one. Sophie's heart began to pound. What do you mean there's a family in Cedar Falls, about 40 minutes from Riverside? The Martinez family. Elena and Michael Martinez. They're a couple in their early 40s, no biological children, and they've been certified foster parents for 3 years. They specialize in taking kids who are a little older, kids who've had a rough time. And Sophie, they want to meet you. The words didn't quite make sense at first. A family wanted to meet her, not take her as an obligation or a favor to someone else, but actually wanted to meet her. When Sophie's voice came out as barely a whisper, day after tomorrow, I'll drive you out there myself. No pressure, no promises yet. Just a meeting, a chance for you to see if it might be a good fit. Would you like that? Would she like that? The question was almost laughable, but underneath the hope that was building in her chest, there was also fear. What if they met her and decided they didn't want her after all? What if she somehow messed this up, as if reading her mind? Ms. Warren continued. Sophie, I want you to listen to me very carefully. The Martinez family knows your whole story. They know about your mother, about the placements that didn't work out, about everything. And they still want to meet you. That means something. That means they're going in with their eyes open. Okay, Sophie said. Yes, I want to meet them. Good girl. I'll pick you up at 9 on the 27th. Dress comfortably, be yourself, and remember you're not being judged. This is just a conversation. All right. After they hung up, Sophie stood holding the phone trying to process this new information. A family. A real family. The hope felt dangerous, like something fragile she had to protect. What was that about? Barbara asked, and for once she actually sounded interested rather than just going through the motions of asking. Sophie explained about the Martinez family, about the meeting, about the possibility of a real placement. As she talked, she watched Barbara's face, carefully trying to gauge her reaction. Barbara was quiet for a long moment after Sophie finished. Then she said something that surprised Sophie completely. Cedar Falls is a good town, bigger than Riverside, more opportunities. She paused, lighting a cigarette. If this works out, Sophie, you take it. You hear me? Don't worry about me or anyone else. You take whatever chance you get to have a better life than the one you've got here. It was perhaps the most honest thing Barbara had ever said to her, and Sophie felt tears prickling at her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. The rest of the day passed in a strange, suspended state. Sophie read her new books, worked on a puzzle one of the bikers had given her, tried not to think too hard about what the meeting with the Martinez family might bring. Hope was a dangerous thing when you'd been disappointed so many times before. That evening, there was a knock at the door. Barbara answered it to find Tommy, the magician biker from the previous day, standing in the hallway with a young woman beside him. Evening, ma'am, Tommy said with a friendly smile. Sorry to disturb you. I'm Tommy Rodriguez. Yes. Same last name as Sophie, though. We're not related. Funny coincidence, right? And this is my wife, Sarah. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd check in on our little angel. Barbara looked like she wanted to refuse them entry, but something in Tommy's easy manner and Sarah's warm smile made her step aside. Come in, I guess. Tommy and Sarah entered the small apartment, and Sophie was struck by how normal they looked. Yesterday in his leather and among all the other bikers, Tommy had seemed like part of a different world. But today, in jeans and a simple jacket, he looked like anyone's uncle. Sarah was petite with curly brown hair and a friendly face, wearing a University of Oregon sweatshirt and carrying a small bag. We brought some leftovers from yesterday. Sarah explained, holding up the bag. And I wanted to give Sophie something. She pulled out a photo album. Not fancy, just a simple album from a drugstore. But when she opened it, Sophie saw that it was filled with the Polaroid pictures from yesterday. Every single one of them. Sophie with Big Mike, Sophie with Lisa, Sophie on Chain's motorcycle, Sophie singing around the fire. Page after page of proof that she had been seen, had been valued, had mattered to all those people. Diane sent these over to me last night, Sarah explained. She and I have been friends for years. Our husbands ride together. Anyway, she thought you should have all of these memories. You know, something to look at when things get hard. Sophie took the album with shaking hands, flipping through the pages slowly. In every picture, she was smiling. Actually smiling. Not the polite smile she'd learned to put on for adults, but a real, genuine expression of joy. She barely recognized herself. "There's something else," Tommy said, pulling up a chair to sit at Sophie's level. "Sarah and I heard through the grapevine, and the biker grapevine is very efficient. Let me tell you that you've got a meeting with a potential foster family in a couple days." Sophie nodded, surprised that word had already spread. "That's great news," Tommy continued. "Really great. But here's the thing, sometimes these meetings can be intimidating. You're going to be nervous, probably scared, definitely worried about making a good impression. So Sarah and I, we wanted to give you some advice from people who've been there." "You were in foster care?" Sophie asked. "Not me," Tommy said, "but Sarah was." "Tell her, babe." Sarah settled onto the arm of Barbara's recliner, looking at Sophie with eyes that held understanding, born of experience. "I was in the system from age 9 to 17, 8 different placements. Some good, some bad, most somewhere in between. And I learned some things along the way about these meetings, about how to navigate them." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "First thing, be honest. Don't try to be who you think they want you to be. If this is going to work, if any placement is going to work, it has to be based on who you really are. The good, the bad, the scared, all of it. But what if they don't like the real me?" Sophie's voice was small. "Then they're not the right family," Sarah said firmly. "And that's okay. Better to find out now than 6 months from now when you've gotten attached. But Sophie, here's what I've learned. The right people, your people, they're going to love you not despite your rough edges, but because of them. Because those rough edges are part of your story, and your story is what makes you you." Tommy nodded. "She's right. And here's another thing. It's okay to have questions for them. This isn't a one-way interview. You're allowed to ask what their house is like, what their rules are, what they expect from you. You're allowed to advocate for yourself." "I don't know how to do that," Sophie admitted. "That's why we're here," Sarah said with a smile. "Let's practice. I'll pretend to be Mrs. Martinez. You ask me questions you want to know the answers to." They spent the next hour role-playing, Sarah patiently answering Sophie's hesitant questions and encouraging her to dig deeper, to really think about what she needed in a family. Tommy coached her on body language, on how to sit up straight, but not stiff, on how to make eye contact without staring. Even Barbara got involved somewhat reluctantly, offering her own gruff advice. "Don't apologize for existing. And if they make you feel like you should walk away." It was, Sophie thought, perhaps the most motherly thing Barbara had ever said to her. As the evening wore on, other bikers stopped by. Not 500 this time, just a handful. Checking in, offering encouragement, making sure Sophie knew she wasn't alone in this. Red brought a new outfit for Sophie to wear to the meeting, something age-appropriate but nice. Phoenix dropped off a care package with snacks in a journal. "For writing down your thoughts," she explained. "Sometimes it helps to get things out of your head." By the time the last visitor left around 9 p.m., Sophie was exhausted but also oddly fortified. She had a plan. She had people in her corner. She had proof in the form of a photo album and a necklace and a room full of presents that she was worth fighting for. That night, as she lay on the couch, Sophie opened the journal Phoenix had given her and wrote her first entry. "Dear future Sophie, right now you're 7 years old and you're terrified but also hopeful. Tomorrow you're going to meet people who might become your family. Real family, the kind that chooses you and keeps choosing you. The Hells Angels came for you, 500 of them. They showed you that people you don't even know can care about you, can show up for you, can prove that you matter. That has to mean something, right? You're scared of hoping. Hoping hurts when it doesn't work out, but not hoping hurts worse. So you're going to hope. You're going to meet the Martinez family and you're going to be honest. And you're going to see if maybe, just maybe, this is the family you've been waiting for. Love, Sophie, age 7, December 26th. The Christmas that changed everything." She closed the journal and tucked it under her pillow, then fingered the angel wings necklace. Through the window, she could see the stars, rare in Oregon's usually cloudy winter, glittering like promises in the dark sky. The next morning, Sophie woke to the sound of Barbara's voice on the phone. She kept her eyes closed, not wanting to intrude, but the words filtered through anyway. "No, I can't take her long term," Barbara was saying. "You know my health isn't good. The doctor said my lungs are shot. I can barely take care of myself, let alone a 7-year-old. She needs stability, needs someone who can actually be there for her." A pause. Yes, I know it's unfortunate timing, but it's better to be honest now than to promise something I can't deliver. If this Martinez thing doesn't work out, you'll have to find another option. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. Sophie's chest tightened. She'd known, of course, that Barbara wasn't a permanent solution. But hearing it stated so bluntly, hearing that she had nowhere to go if the Martinez family didn't want her, made everything feel more precarious. The stakes had just gotten impossibly higher. She kept her eyes closed, kept her breathing even until Barbara hung up and shuffled back to her bedroom. Only then did Sophie allow herself to feel the fear creeping in. This meeting wasn't just an opportunity. It was possibly her only chance. The morning of December 27th arrived cold and clear, the kind of winter day where the air itself seemed to sparkle with possibility. Sophie woke early, too nervous to sleep, and spent an hour getting ready with a care that bordered on obsessive. She wore the outfit Red had brought: nice jeans without holes, a soft sweater in deep blue, and her new winter coat. The angel wings necklace hung visible now outside her shirt, a reminder, a talisman, a promise that she was worthy of being chosen. Barbara made breakfast without being asked. Scrambled eggs in toast, actual butter instead of margarine, and even sat with Sophie while she ate. "You look nice," Barbara said, and though the words came out awkward, they were genuine. "Thank you for letting me stay here," Sophie said suddenly. I know it's been hard." Barbara was quiet for a long moment, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "Your mother was my daughter," she said finally, "and I failed her in about every way a parent can fail a child. I don't know if I can do better with you. Probably can't. But those bikers the other day, they reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That maybe it's never too late to try." It wasn't a grand declaration, but coming from Barbara, it was seismic. "If this works out with the Martinez family," Barbara continued, "you remember you've got people here. Me, Ms. Warren, those damn bikers who won't leave you alone." The corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been the start of a smile. "You've got a whole army now, kid. Use it." Ms. Warren arrived at 9 sharp, her reliable Honda Civic idling in the parking lot. She was dressed professionally but warmly, and when Sophie climbed into the passenger seat, she found a gift bag waiting. "A little something for courage," Ms. Warren explained. Inside was a small stuffed dog, soft and friendly looking, and a card that read, "For Sophie, the bravest girl I know. Whatever happens today, I'm proud of you. Ms. W." The drive to Cedar Falls took 45 minutes through winding mountain roads, passing through stands of pine and fir that stood sentinel under the winter sky. Ms. Warren filled the silence with gentle chatter about neutral topics, the weather, a funny story about her own Christmas, the new coffee shop that had opened in Cedar Falls. "The Martinez family knows we're coming at 10, she said as they entered the town limits. "They live in the old mill district. It's a nice area. Used to be industrial, but they redeveloped it. Lots of families, good schools, a river walk. Very different from Riverside." Cedar Falls was indeed different. Bigger, cleaner, with an energy that Riverside lacked. They passed shops and restaurants that actually looked open and thriving. Parks where families were building snowmen. A river that sparkled in the winter sun. It was the kind of town where people chose to live, not just ended up. The Martinez house was a modest 2-story in a neighborhood of similar homes, each one well-maintained, with small yards and attached garages. There was a wreath on the door, icicle lights along the roofline, and a car in the driveway that suggested people who took care of their things but weren't showing off. "Ready?" Ms. Warren asked, parking at the curb. Sophie nodded, though her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. They walked up the path together, Miss Warren's hand warm and steadying on Sophie's shoulder. Before they could knock, the door opened, revealing a woman in her early 40s, with kind eyes and dark hair streaked with gray. She was average height, comfortably built, wearing jeans and a soft purple sweater. "You must be Sophie," she said, her voice warm and genuinely welcoming. "I'm Elena Martinez. It's so wonderful to meet you. Please come in. It's freezing out there." The interior of the house was warm and lived in without being cluttered. Comfortable furniture, bookshelves filled with actual books, artwork on the walls that looked handmade rather than store-bought. Through the living room, Sophie could see a kitchen with a large window overlooking a snow-covered backyard where a bird feeder attracted a collection of winter birds. A man emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray with hot chocolate and cookies. He was tall and thin with glasses, and a beard, wearing a flannel shirt and a welcoming smile. "And I'm Michael," he said, setting the tray down on the coffee table. "We're so glad you're here, Sophie. Ms. Warren has told us wonderful things about you." They all settled into the living room, Miss Warren and Sophie on one couch, Elena and Michael on the other. The hot chocolate was perfect rich and not too sweet, and the cookies were homemade. "So, Sophie," Elena began, her posture open and relaxed. "Ms. Warren has told us about your situation, about what you've been through, but we'd love to hear from you directly. What do you like to do? What makes you happy?" It was such a simple question, but Sophie couldn't remember the last time an adult had asked her about her happiness, as if it was something that mattered. "I like to read," she said softly, "and I got a bike for Christmas." She hesitated, unsure how they'd react. From the Hells Angels," Michael finished with a smile. "Ms. Warren told us about that. 500 bikers showing up for one little girl. That's pretty remarkable. Shows that people recognize something special when they see it." You don't think that's bad?" Sophie asked. "Why would we think it's bad?" Elena asked, genuinely puzzled. "A community organization came together to help a child in need. That's beautiful. That's the kind of thing that gives you hope for humanity." They spent the next hour talking, really talking, not the stilted question and answer sessions Sophie had endured at other placements. Elena and Michael asked about school, about favorite books, about whether Sophie had ever tried art or music or sports. They shared about themselves too. Elena was a nurse who worked 3 days a week at the hospital. Michael was a high school history teacher. They'd been married for 15 years, had always wanted children, but hadn't been able to have biological kids of their own. "We became foster parents because we have love to give," Michael explained simply. "And there are kids who need that love." It seemed like the most natural thing in the world. "Have you had other foster kids?" Sophie asked, remembering Sarah's advice to ask questions. "We have," Elena said. "3 so far. 2 were short-term placements, kids who needed a safe place while their families got back on their feet. They've both gone home now, and we still keep in touch with their parents. And we had 1 long-term placement, a teenage boy named Marcus. He was with us for 2 years before he aged out of the system. He's in college now, doing really well. He comes home for holidays." "So you're not looking to adopt?" The question came out before Sophie could stop it, and she immediately regretted it. Too direct, too needy. But Elena and Michael exchanged a look, and when Elena spoke, her voice was gentle but honest. "Sophie, we've learned not to make promises we can't keep. Every placement is different. Some kids need a temporary place, and that's what we provide. Some kids become family in a way that goes beyond paperwork. We don't know which category you'll fall into yet. And honestly, you don't know either. But here's what we can promise. If you come here, we will be committed to you for however long you need us, whether that's a few months or forever." It was the most honest answer Sophie could have hoped for. No false promises, no fairy tale endings guaranteed, but also no dismissal of the possibility. "Can I see the rest of the house?" Sophie asked. "Of course," Elena stood immediately. "Let me give you the tour." The house had 3 bedrooms upstairs. The master bedroom, a guest room that doubled as Michael's office, and a 3rd room that Elena opened with obvious pride. "We'd hoped you'd come," she said softly. "So we prepared this. If you decide this isn't the right fit, no hard feelings. Michael uses it for grading papers anyway. But if you do decide to try this out, this would be your room." Sophie stepped into the space and felt her breath catch. It wasn't overly decorated or filled with things, but it was clearly prepared for a child. A comfortable bed with a colorful quilt, a desk by the window with good light for reading or homework, empty bookshelves waiting to be filled, a dresser with drawers that opened smoothly, clean carpet, pale yellow walls that felt warm and cheerful. "We didn't want to make assumptions about what you'd like," Elena explained, "so we kept it simple. But if you came to live here, you could decorate however you wanted. Paint the walls, add posters, whatever makes it feel like yours." Sophie walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. There was a small patio, a patch that was probably a garden in summer, and beyond that other backyards where she could see a treehouse and a trampoline. A neighborhood where kids lived and played, where she could ride her bike without worrying about broken glass or needles in the grass. "What would the rules be?" Sophie asked, turning back to Elena. "If I came here?" "Good question." Elena leaned against the door frame, clearly taking the question seriously. "We have some basic expectations. Go to school, be respectful, Let us know where you are. No lying, normal stuff. We eat dinner together as much as possible. We do chores together on weekends. We have movie night on Fridays. And we believe in communication. If something's bothering you, we talk about it. We don't let things fester. What if I mess up? The fear in Sophie's voice was audible. What if I'm not good enough? Elena's expression softened with understanding. She came further into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. Sophie sat down cautiously. Sophie, everyone messes up. Michael and I mess up all the time. We forget to buy milk. We say things we don't mean when we're tired. We make mistakes. That's what being human is. The question isn't whether you'll mess up. You will. We all do. The question is what happens after. What do you mean in a real family? Elena said. When someone messes up, you talk about it. You figure out what went wrong and how to do better next time. You forgive and move forward. You don't keep score. You don't hold grudges. You just keep choosing to love each other. Even if Sophie struggled to articulate her deepest fear. Even if I'm like my mom, what if there's something wrong inside me? Elena's eyes filled with compassion. Oh, sweetheart, there is nothing wrong inside you. Your mother struggled with addiction, which is a disease. It wasn't a character flaw, and it's certainly not something that automatically passes to you. You are your own person. You get to write your own story. They sat in silence for a moment, and Sophie felt something loosening in her chest. Something that had been tight and knotted for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without that weight. I want to try, Sophie said finally. I want to see if this could work. Elena's smile was radiant. So do we, Sophie. So do we. They went back downstairs where Michael and Ms. Warren were deep in conversation about logistics. When they saw Sophie and Elena's expressions, both adults broke into smiles. So Ms. Warren asked hopefully, I think we're going to try this, Sophie said, her voice stronger now. The next hour was a flurry of practical discussions. Ms. Warren explained the process. There would be paperwork, home visits, a transition period where Sophie would visit several times before moving in permanently. The Martinez family was experienced with this, handled it all with practiced ease that somehow made Sophie feel safer rather than like just another case. How about we start with this weekend, Michael suggested. You could come Friday after school, stay through Sunday. Give us all a chance to see how it feels in a real everyday setting. No pressure, just living. I'd like that, Sophie said. As they prepared to leave, Elena pulled out her phone. Can I give you my number so you can call or text if you have questions or just want to talk? Sophie carefully entered the number into Miss Warren's phone, which the counselor promised to help her access anytime. As they walked back to the car, Sophie turned one last time to look at the house. Elena and Michael stood in the doorway, waving, their expressions full of hope and promise. But just before Sophie turned away, she saw them exchange a look, quick concern, something passing between them that she couldn't read. It was gone in an instant, replaced by smiles, but Sophie had seen it. A flicker of worry, of doubt, of something. What do you think, Ms. Warren asked as they drove away. I think maybe I found them, Sophie said quietly. Or they found me. I'm not sure which. Does it matter? Sophie thought about it, pushing away the nagging worry about that look she'd seen. No, I guess it doesn't. Friday arrived with agonizing slowness. School dragged on forever, each class an eternity of watching the clock. But finally the dismissal bell rang, and Mrs. Warren was waiting in the parking lot to drive Sophie to Cedar Falls. This time Sophie had an overnight bag packed with her new clothes, her books, the photo album, and the journal. The angel wings necklace hung around her neck, visible and proud. The weekend with the Martinez family unfolded with a naturalness that surprised Sophie. There was no formal interview quality to it, no sense that she was being constantly evaluated. Instead, it was just life. They made breakfast together, Michael teaching Sophie how to make his famous pancakes, which were honestly just okay, but he insisted were legendary. They went for a walk along the river, Elena pointing out local landmarks and sharing stories about the town. Saturday afternoon, they went to a bookstore, an actual bookstore with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a cafe, and Elena told Sophie she could pick out 3 books, any 3. When Sophie chose carefully, trying to pick things that weren't too expensive, Elena gently encouraged her to choose what she actually wanted, not what she thought she should want. That evening, they had movie night. Michael made popcorn the old-fashioned way on the stove, and they watched an animated film that made them all laugh. Sophie sat between Elena and Michael on the couch, and at some point during the movie, Elena's arm came to rest around Sophie's shoulders. It was casual, natural, and Sophie leaned into it without thinking. It felt like home. But Saturday night, Sophie woke to the sound of raised voices downstairs. She crept to the top of the stairs, her heart pounding, and listened. I don't know if we can do this, Elena. Michael's voice strained and frustrated. She's so shut down. What if we can't reach her? We knew it would be hard. Elena's response was quieter but firm. She's been through trauma. It's not just hard. Marcus was hard. This is different. She won't talk, won't open up. What if we fail her like everyone else? We can't think like that. We have to give it time. How much time? What if she never trusts us? What if we're not equipped for this? Sophie retreated to her bedroom, her heart shattering. They were already doubting. They were going to send her back. She was right not to hope. Barbara was right. There was something wrong with her, something missing, something that made her unlovable no matter how hard she tried. She climbed back into bed and pulled the covers over her head, the angel wings necklace pressing cold against her chest. A lie, she thought. All of it. 500 people showing up meant nothing if she was fundamentally broken. Sunday morning arrived gray and heavy. Sophie came downstairs with her walls firmly back in place, her face carefully neutral. She packed her bag, methodically answered questions in monosyllables, avoided eye contact. Elena and Michael noticed the change but misread it completely. Are you feeling okay, Sophie? Elena asked with concern. Do you miss your grandmother? I'm fine. Sophie's voice was flat, just tired. They tried harder to engage her, suggesting activities, offering her favorite foods from yesterday. But Sophie pulled further away, with each attempt retreating into the protective shell she'd built over 2 years of disappointment. When Ms. Warren came to pick her up Sunday afternoon, Sophie was already waiting by the door, bag in hand. Did something happen? Ms. Warren asked as they drove back to Riverside. Sophie stared out the window. I don't want to talk about it. At Barbara's apartment, Sophie went straight to the couch, curled into a ball, and refused dinner. Barbara watched her with knowing eyes but said nothing. That night, Sophie opened her journal and wrote through tears that blurred the ink, They don't want me. I heard them. Michael said they can't do this. I knew this would happen. I knew I shouldn't have hoped. There's something wrong with me, and everyone can see it except me. The angels were wrong. I'm not worth 500 people. I'm not worth anyone. She considered tearing off the angel wings necklace, but couldn't bring herself to do it. Barbara found her like that, crying silently into her pillow, the journal open beside her. For the first time since Sophie had known her, Barbara sat down on the couch and pulled Sophie against her side. She didn't try to fix it, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just sat there, solid and present. Sometimes adults are idiots, Sophie, Barbara said finally. Sometimes we're scared too. She stroked Sophie's hair with awkward gentleness. Your mother was scared every day of her life. Fear makes people do stupid things. The phone rang, cutting through the moment. Barbara answered it, then held it out to Sophie. It's for you. Some guy named Tommy. Sophie took the phone with shaking hands. Hey, little angel. Tommy's voice was warm. Lisa told me to check on you. How was the weekend? And somehow, hearing his voice, Sophie broke. The whole story came pouring out, what she'd overheard, how Michael had said they couldn't do this, how she'd been stupid to hope, how she was going back to being nobody's problem again. Tommy listened without interrupting. When Sophie finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a moment. Don't move, he said finally. I'm coming over, and I'm bringing backup. Within 90 minutes, Tommy and Sarah pulled up outside Barbara's apartment complex. Lisa arrived 10 minutes later on her motorcycle, her leather jacket dusted with road salt. Barbara let them all in without question, stepping aside as if she'd been expecting an army of bikers to show up at her door on a Sunday night. Sophie was still on the couch, eyes red and swollen, the journal clutched against her chest. Lisa sat down first, directly across from Sophie, her gaze steady and serious. Tell me exactly what you heard. Word for word. Sophie recounted the conversation, her voice breaking on certain phrases. Michael saying they couldn't do this. Michael saying she was too shut down. Michael worried they'd fail her. When Sophie finished, Lisa sat back, her expression shifting through several emotions before landing on something that looked almost like anger, but not at Sophie. Tommy leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. Sophie, listened to me very carefully. You heard two people scared. They are not good enough for you. That's not, it is. Sarah interrupted gently. I've heard that exact conversation before. Different words, same fear. They're not worried you'll fail them. They're terrified they'll fail you. That's completely different. But Michael said that he's scared. Lisa's voice was firm. Being scared isn't the same as not wanting you. Good foster parents worry they're not enough. Bad ones think they're doing you a favor by taking you in. The fact that Michael is questioning himself means he cares. He wants to get it right. Sophie looked down at her hands, trying to process this interpretation. It felt impossible, like looking at the same picture from a different angle and seeing something entirely new. But I was trying so hard, Sophie whispered. I was trying to be perfect, to not be a problem, and it still wasn't enough. Sarah moved to sit beside Sophie on the couch. That's exactly the issue. You were performing. They were probably performing too. Everybody trying to be perfect, nobody being real. How can you build a relationship on that? She tucked a strand of Sophie's hair behind her ear. When I was in my longest placement, I did the same thing you're doing. I was so terrified they'd send me back that I turned myself into a robot. No emotions, no needs, no opinions. And you know what happened? They thought I didn't like them. Thought I wanted to leave. Did you? Sophie asked. No, but I was too scared to say that. Too scared to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is the only thing that makes relationships real. Lisa pulled her chair closer, her expression intense. Here's what you need to understand, Sophie. You're 7 years old. You shouldn't have to be the brave one in this situation. But right now, you have a choice. You can run, protect yourself by shutting down and never giving anyone a chance to hurt you again. Or you can take the biggest risk of your life. What risk? Tell them what you heard, Lisa said. Tell them how it made you feel. Be honest about being scared. Give them a chance to explain, to be honest back. If they fail you after that, then screw them, we'll find you another family. But Sophie, you have to give them the chance first. Sophie felt something crack inside her chest, a realization spreading through her like cold water. I've been doing the same thing they were doing, she said slowly, trying to protect myself by not being real. Exactly. Tommy's smile was sad. You're all so busy trying not to get hurt that nobody's actually connecting. Barbara spoke up from across the room, startling everyone. She'd been so quiet they'd almost forgotten she was there. Your mother ran from everything that scared her. Every single thing. Barbara's voice was rough with old grief. Running felt safer than staying, and it killed her, Sophie. Don't be like her. Be braver than she could be. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. What if I call them and it doesn't change anything? Sophie asked. What if they still don't want me? Then at least you'll know, Lisa said. And you'll know you were brave enough to try. But hiding and pretending, that's guaranteed to fail. Honesty might fail too, but it's the only thing that has a chance of working. Sophie looked around at the faces surrounding her, Tommy and Sarah, who'd driven an hour on a Sunday night to help her. Lisa, who'd ridden her motorcycle through the cold. Barbara offering her painful wisdom. These people, this strange collection of bikers and broken family, all showing up because they believed she was worth it. Okay, Sophie said finally. I'll call them tomorrow. I'll tell them the truth. Lisa pulled Sophie into a fierce hug. That's my girl. That's my brave little angel. They stayed until past midnight. Lisa helped Sophie write down what she wanted to say, organizing her thoughts into something coherent. Tommy did magic tricks to ease the tension, making cards disappear and reappear until Sophie actually laughed. Sarah shared her own story of confronting foster parents who'd misunderstood her silence, how that conversation had changed everything. After they left, Barbara made Sophie tea, actual tea, not just hot water with a tea bag dunked in it, but properly steeped and sweetened. Those people care about you more than blood relatives, Barbara observed. Why, Sophie asked. Because they chose to. Choice is stronger than blood, Sophie. Remember that. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Miss Warren came to Barbara's apartment at 9, her expression concerned but hopeful. She'd heard from Tommy what had happened. You ready for this? Miss Warren asked. Sophie nodded, though her hands were shaking as she picked up the phone. She'd memorized Elena's number, had rehearsed what she wanted to say 100 times in her head. But when Elena answered, cheerful and surprised, all Sophie's careful words evaporated. Sophie, is everything okay? I heard you and Michael talking Saturday night. The words came out blunt, unpolished. I heard him say he doesn't know if you can do this. I heard him say he's scared you'll fail me. The silence on Elena's line was absolute. Sophie could hear her breathing, could almost feel her shock through the phone. "Oh, Sophie." Elena's voice was thick with emotion. "Sweetheart, we didn't know you heard that. I'm so sorry. Is it true?" Sophie pressed. "Are you going to send me back?" "Omanum," Elena said immediately. "No, Sophie, that's not. Can you hold on? Let me get Michael. You deserve to hear from both of us." There was a muffled sound, voices in the background. Then Michael's voice came on shakier than Sophie had ever heard it. "Sophie, I'm so sorry you heard that conversation. And I'm even more sorry that we didn't have it with you instead of about you. You deserve better than adults who whisper behind your back. But you said I was scared." Michael's voice cracked slightly. "I said I didn't know if we were equipped for this. And Sophie, I need you to understand we weren't doubting you. We were doubting ourselves. I don't understand." Michael took a breath, and when he spoke again, his words came faster, more raw. "My father was a terrible parent. Abusive alcoholic, left when I was 8. I've spent my whole life terrified I'd inherited that. That's why Elena and I didn't have biological kids. I was too scared I'd hurt them the way he hurt me. And when I saw how withdrawn you were this weekend, I thought I'd already damaged you. I thought I was failing before we even started." Elena's voice joined in, and Sophie realized they'd put the phone on speaker. "We weren't questioning whether you're worth it, Sophie. We were questioning whether we're good enough. And that conversation you heard, that was Michael's fear talking. Fear that he's too broken to help someone else who's been hurt." Sophie felt tears streaming down her face, but she forced herself to keep talking. "I was withdrawn because I heard you. Because I thought you didn't want me. I was trying to protect myself by shutting down first." "Oh, honey," Elena's voice broke. "We were all protecting ourselves. We were all so scared of getting hurt that nobody was being real." Ms. Warren, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. "This is actually a really healthy conversation you're having. All three of you admitting you were scared you were performing. That's more honest than most families ever get." There was a long pause. Then Michael said something that changed everything. "Sophie, how about we start over? All of us agree to stop performing. To be honest, even when it's scary. To tell each other when we're afraid instead of hiding it." "What would that look like?" Sophie asked. "It would look like me admitting that I'm terrified of messing this up," Elena said. "That I lie awake at night wondering if I'm doing enough, if I'm saying the right things. And me admitting that my father's voice still lives in my head sometimes," Michael added. "Telling me I'm not capable of being a good parent. That's my issue to work on, not yours to fix." Sophie took a shaky breath. "And me admitting that I've been trying to be perfect because I think if I need anything or mess up, you'll send me away. Because that's what always happens. Then we need to change that pattern," Elena said firmly. "We need to build something based on truth, on all of us being imperfect humans trying our best." Sophie looked at Ms. Warren, who nodded encouragingly. "Can I come back this weekend?" Sophie asked. "And can we just be normal? Like real normal, not trying to impress each other, normal, actually." Elena's voice held something new, something hopeful. "Winter break starts next week. What if you came for longer? Stayed the whole break, gave us a real chance to see how this works when we're not all performing." Sophie felt the familiar fear rising, but underneath it was something stronger. Something that felt like possibility. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." The week before winter break passed in a blur of preparation. Barbara helped Sophie pack everything she owned, which now filled several small boxes instead of a single backpack. Bikers stopped by with transition gifts. Phoenix brought more journals, Red brought a care package with snacks and a new jacket. Chains brought Sophie a chain wallet like his own because he thought it was cool. On the first day of winter break, Ms. Warren drove Sophie to Cedar Falls with all her belongings. When they arrived, Elena and Michael were waiting on the front porch, and Sophie could see the nervousness in their faces but also genuine happiness. "Welcome," Michael said, "to an imperfect house with imperfect people trying to figure this out together." The week unfolded differently than the first weekend. This time when Sophie had a nightmare about her mother and woke up screaming, Elena and Michael didn't know what to do. They sat on her bed looking helpless and scared. "We don't know how to help," Elena admitted. "But we're here. We're not going anywhere." Sophie, still shaking, made herself speak through the fear. I dream that she's calling for me and I can't reach her. That it's my fault she died because I wasn't enough to make her want to stay alive. Oh, sweetheart, no. Michael's voice was fierce. Addiction doesn't work that way. You were a child. You couldn't have saved her. They sat with Sophie until dawn, not trying to fix everything with words, just being present. And somehow that was enough. When Sophie accidentally knocked Elena's favorite mug off the counter and it shattered, her first instinct was to hide the pieces and deny everything. But she forced herself to confess immediately, crying. It was an accident. I'm so sorry. I'll replace it. Sophie, Michael interrupted gently. It's a mug. We love you way more than we love mugs. The simplicity of that statement, the casual certainty that they loved her, made Sophie cry harder. Midweek, Barbara drove out to visit, bringing a box of Jessica's things she'd been saving. Photos of Sophie's mother, young and healthy and full of life. A bracelet Jessica had loved. Letters she'd written as a teenager, full of dreams and plans. Your mother wasn't always lost, Barbara told Sophie. She was bright and funny and full of hope once. Remember the good parts too, not just the end. Barbara sat with Elena and Michael over coffee, and Sophie watched as her grandmother gave them something precious: permission. Take care of her better than I could, Barbara said. Better than I took care of Jessica. Break the cycle. On the last day of winter break, Elena asked Sophie to sit down at the kitchen table. Michael joined them and both looked nervous. We need to talk about something important. Elena began, and Sophie's heart stopped. Here it came, the rejection she'd been waiting for. But Elena continued, Michael and I have been talking, and we want to start adoption paperwork. Not fostering. Adoption. Permanent. Making this legal and forever. But only if that's what you want too. Sophie couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Is that a yes? Michael asked gently. Yes, Sophie managed. Yes, please. They held each other and cried, three imperfect people choosing to become a family. February arrived with bitter cold and clear skies. Moving day was official now, all of Sophie's belongings permanently transferred to the yellow-walled bedroom in Cedar Falls. Barbara came to help load the truck, gruff and complaining about her back, but making sure Sophie's bicycle was properly secured. Before she left, Barbara pulled Sophie aside and handed her an envelope. Open it later, she said gruffly. Inside was the photo Sophie had seen before: Jessica, young and healthy, holding baby Sophie and laughing. But on the back, Barbara had added new words in shaky handwriting: before everything went wrong. Remember, she loved you. And remember, you're allowed to be happy. You're allowed to have what she couldn't. Love, Grandma Barbara. Sophie tucked the photo into the frame of her bedroom mirror, right next to a Polaroid from Christmas showing her surrounded by smiling bikers. Past and present. Loss and gain. The full story of who she was becoming. The Hells Angels didn't forget her. Throughout winter and into spring, they checked in regularly. Tommy and Sarah became frequent visitors. Big Mike called once a month just to see how things were going. Lisa sent care packages with treats and encouraging notes. In March, the Oregon chapter invited Sophie and her family to their annual spring rally. Elena and Michael agreed immediately, understanding that these connections were part of who Sophie was now. The rally was held at a campground outside Salem, and when they arrived, Sophie was overwhelmed by the welcome she received. Bikers she recognized and many she didn't came to greet her, to meet her new family, to verify with their own eyes that the little girl from Christmas was thriving. Big Mike gave Michael and Elena his personal number. If Sophie ever needs anything, and I mean anything, you call, day or night. The angels look after their own, and Sophie is one of ours now. Michael shook his hand solemnly. We appreciate that more than you know. It's not often a child comes with her own army of guardians. She earned it, Big Mike said simply. That kid's got something special. We just made sure she knew it. Sophie watched the exchange, feeling the strange, wonderful weight of being claimed by two families. The one she was born near and the one she'd chosen. Both real, both permanent. As spring turned to summer, Sophie's life found its rhythm. She excelled at her new school in Cedar Falls, the teachers commenting on how she'd blossomed. She made friends, real friends, who came over for sleepovers and birthday parties. She joined the art club and discovered she loved painting, loved putting colors on canvas until something beautiful emerged. Elena took her to the hospital, sometimes let Sophie see where she worked. Michael brought her to his high school history classes as a special guest. And Sophie loved hearing him teach, seeing how much his students respected him. There were hard days too, days when Sophie had nightmares or when old fears surfaced, days when she tested boundaries pushing to see if they'd send her away. But Elena and Michael kept their promise. They stayed, they talked, they worked through it together. In May, the adoption paperwork was officially filed. The legal process would take months, but everyone knew it was just formality now. This was Sophie's family, real and permanent and chosen. Barbara continued her AA meetings, slowly getting healthier. She video called Sophie every week, their conversations still awkward but genuine. The relationship would never be warm, but it was real. Barbara was trying in her broken way to be better. Christmas Eve arrived again, nearly a year after 500 motorcycles had rolled into a parking lot and changed everything. Elena and Michael took Sophie back to Riverside. They visited Barbara first, who looked lighter, somehow less burdened by old regrets. "You look good, kid," Barbara said and meant it. They stopped by the elementary school to see Ms. Warren, who cried happy tears and hugged Sophie so tight she could barely breathe. "Look at you," Ms. Warren kept saying. "Just look at you." Then they drove to Barbara's old apartment complex. The building looked the same, peeling paint, rusted railings, sad and worn. But in the parking lot, mounted on a simple stone marker, was a small plaque. Sophie had heard the bikers installed it, but hadn't seen it yet. She stood before it now, Elena and Michael flanking her, and read the words engraved in metal. On this spot, 500 people prove that one person's love can change a life. Christmas 24. Never ride alone. Sophie touched the plaque with trembling fingers. The angel wings necklace she still wore every day, catching the winter light. She thought about the girl who'd stood in this parking lot a year ago, hollow and afraid, convinced she was fundamentally unlovable. That girl didn't exist anymore. Or rather, she did, but she'd been transformed by people who chose to see her, to claim her, to prove that she mattered. "Ready to go home?" Elena asked gently, her hand warm on Sophie's shoulder. Home. A year ago, that word had meant nothing. Just a concept that applied to other people, other lives. But now it meant the house with yellow walls and the family who chose her every single day. It meant the community of bikers who'd claimed her as their own. It meant Barbara trying in her imperfect way to be better. It meant being Sophie Chen, not the girl nobody wanted, but the girl 500 people rode through the cold to save. "Yeah," Sophie said, taking Elena's hand and Michael's too. "Let's go home." As they drove away from Riverside towards Cedar Falls, Sophie looked back one last time at the place where her story had changed. The parking lot was empty now, just an ordinary apartment complex in an ordinary town. But Sophie knew better. Nothing about that Christmas had been ordinary. It had been miraculous, transformative, exactly what she needed when she needed it most. The Oregon landscape rolled past the car window, familiar now. This was her state, her home. She closed her eyes and sent a silent thank you out into the universe to Mrs. Warren for making the call, to the angels for answering it, to Elena and Michael for opening their hearts, to Barbara for trying, and to herself for having the courage to hope when hope seemed impossible. She was 8 years old now. She had a family. She had a home. She had a future stretching out before her, full of possibility and promise. And she had learned the most important lesson of all, that she was worth showing up for, worth fighting for, worth 500 motorcycles and countless acts of love. She was worth it all, and she always had been. That night back in Cedar Falls, Sophie added a final entry to the journal Phoenix had given her. "Dear past Sophie, you made it. You were so scared a year ago, convinced you were broken and unlovable. You heard 500 engines roar into that parking lot and couldn't believe they were there for you. You met a family who scared you with their kindness because you'd learned that kindness always came with conditions. But you were brave. You chose to hope even when it hurt. You chose to be honest even when it was terrifying. You chose to let people love you even though you'd been taught that love was temporary. The angels were right about you. You did have something special inside, not perfection, not the absence of fear, but the courage to keep trying, to keep believing that you deserved better, to keep opening your heart even after it had been broken. You have a mom and dad now, not because they gave birth to you, but because they chose you and you chose them back. You have Barbara, complicated and imperfect, but showing up in her own way. You have 500 bikers who will answer the phone if you call. You have friends and teachers and a future. The girl you were hollow and afraid, she's still part of you, but she's not alone anymore. She's surrounded by people who prove that family isn't always blood, that home isn't always where you start, and that sometimes the most unexpected people are capable of the most extraordinary love. You were always worth it, Sophie, even when you couldn't see it yourself. You were always worth 500 motorcycles roaring through the cold to say, "We see you, we claim you. You matter." Never forget that. Love, Sophie. Age 8, December 24th. 1 year after everything changed. She closed the journal and looked around her room. Her actual room, not a temporary space, but a place that belonged to her. The walls she'd painted herself a soft lavender she loved. The bookshelves overflowing with stories. The photos on her mirror showing her journey from that hollow-eyed child on a couch to this a girl who smiled freely, who laughed without fear, who was learning that love could be permanent. From downstairs, she heard Elena and Michael talking, their voices warm and easy. They were making plans for tomorrow, Christmas Day, with just the three of them, quiet and perfect, in theirs. Sophie touched the angel wings at her throat one more time, then turned off her light and settled into bed. Outside, snow was beginning to fall soft and clean, covering Cedar Falls in white. The world felt new, full of possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. She thought about the memorial plaque in Riverside, about the promise engraved there, "Never ride alone." She never would again. Not with her army of bikers checking in, not with Elena and Michael downstairs, not with Barbara's weekly calls, not with friends waiting at school. She was surrounded by chosen family, by people who taught her that being wanted wasn't about being perfect, it was about being real. Sophie Chen, 8 years old, closed her eyes and drifted into sleep without nightmares. In her dreams, she was flying angel wings, carrying her higher and higher, 500 motorcycles roaring approval below, in a future bright with promise stretching endlessly ahead. She had found her place in the world, not where she'd started, but where she'd been brave enough to land. And it was better, so much better than anything she could have imagined. The girl nobody wanted had become the girl everyone fought for, and she would never ever be alone again.